Welcome to episode number 34 of the American Regulars Podcast. I am JD Walter, and boys and girls, we have an October surprise for you today. That's right, halfway through October, and big news for the presidential election. If you want to hear about the election, if you want to hear about liberty, freedom, right, Austrian economics, I'm your guy. Like, follow, subscribe, whether you're listening to this on YouTube or any of the podcast stations. Give me a like, comment, tell your friends. All right. Now, what is this October surprise? Well, in 2008, 2009, fact check me on the year, Kamala Harris wrote a book. And I guess people are just getting around to reading it. I have not, full disclosure. And I never will read it. I've just got better things to do with myself. I do not, listening to Kamala speak can be tough enough. Having to read the whole book, no thank you. But thankfully we got some people that have done it for us. Notably, an Austrian man named Stefan Weber. And this guy's, modus operandi apparently is to check people for plagiarism. See if they are being legitimate and diligent in their writings and making sure that they're giving proper attributations and citing their sources properly. And I guess we just leave it up to the Germans, or I guess the Austrians in this case, for something as fun as checking for plagiarism as a pastime. But I do appreciate it. And this guy read Kamala Harris's book. It was called Smart on Crime, A Career Prosecutor's Plan to Make Us Safer. And he finds what he calls over a dozen vicious plagiarism fragments. Okay? This was brought to light, especially to the Americans or whatnot, through the Substack by Christopher Rufo. He posted it on his Substack. Christopher Rufo is kind of known for being against like woke academia and woke stuff in general, and I think he had a big deal to do with the Claudine Gay plagiarism scandal, I guess you could say, from a year ago. She was the dean of Harvard and got caught just ripping people off. Right? So, once again, we find plagiarism abound. So, in the Substack article, it says there were minor transgressions, small sets of text, and insufficient paraphrasing done, but there were more serious ones also. All right? There were verbatim paragraphs from news reports, extensive sections from a John Jay College of Criminal Justice press release, and without any citation whatsoever to try to make it look like these pieces of research were her own, right? Later, there were long passages taken straight from Wikipedia. This would be equivalent to, a high school or junior high level of plagiarism, just copy and paste darn near. Now, I will say this right away. Kamala Harris very much she didn't write this book. They hire ghostwriters. Right? A ghostwriter writes as you in the first person, and they get their bullet points or their footnotes or their storyboard or whatever it is. They know what you're supposed to be talking about, and then they write it for you because either you can't write or you're too busy to write, or in Kamala's case, I think it could be both, right? Or maybe you just don't want to, right? But then it exposes, hey, look, I made a book. I get some money for it. People, I think political books, I think a lot of people buy them. I think a lot of groups and lobbyists or something buy them. No one reads them. They sit them on bookshelves, and it's just a way to launder money to people that are doing you favors. Some people are going to read it for sure, but I think a lot of that is, I think it's a money laundering scheme. I really do. Call me a conspiracy theorist. Who wants to read a book about Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or Mike Huckabee or whoever? Who wants to read those books? Okay, other plagiarisms. The best one, for sure, And this one was known. This one was brought up like 3 years ago or so. People pointed this one out. All these not little, but all these plagiarisms before, they're not as sexy, right? She's taking them from articles. She's taking them from press releases from colleges. She's taking them from Wikipedia. Those aren't really attention grabbing. It's interesting that there's over a dozen of them and they can be a paragraph or more at a time. But this is the good one, and it was found earlier. Okay, she appears to borrow from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in an anecdote from her childhood. Okay, Kamala Harris wrote, or her ghostwriter wrote, and I quote, "My mother used to laugh when she told the story about a time I was fussing as a toddler. She leaned down to ask me, 'Kamala, what's wrong? What do you want?' And I wailed back at her, 'Freedom.'" And that's freedom with a W, because she's a toddler. She's only 1 to 3 years old, and she's shouting at her mom for freedom. Also, George Washington chopped down a cherry tree, and he could not tell a lie, right? Romulus and Remus, they suckled on a she-wolf. This is the Kamala Harris origin story. And if you're thinking that that's a little bit unbelievable, you're correct. She didn't say that. I'm sure she didn't say that. It's you see those X posts sometimes where it's like, "Today my kid asked this," and then the person puts their own viewpoints in some sort of quote they attribute to their child. That way you can't attack it, and it's like, oh wow, out of the mouths of babes comes this innocent intelligence, and it's just not true. This one though seems particularly untrue because it's very similar to a Martin Luther King story. Okay, this is from, and this blew me away, Martin Luther King Jr. interview in Playboy, 1965. Wow. I did not know that. That is, man, there's got to be a good joke there somewhere. I don't know what. You don't really think of the civil rights icons doing Playboy interviews. But I'm digressing. Let's get to his interview. "I never will forget a moment in Birmingham when a white policeman accosted a little Negro girl, 7 or 8 years old, who was walking in a demonstration with her mother. 'What do you want?' the policeman asked gruffly, and the little girl looked him straight in the eye and answered, 'Feed 'em.' She couldn't even pronounce it, but she knew." Now, that's a nice little story. And I tend to believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is probably telling the truth there. I would also like to stress that that was MLK who said Negro. I was quoting him, right? Okay, now, some people might say that this clearly isn't plagiarism because she put a W in the way she mispronounced it as a toddler. But, his is also a little more believable because it's a 7 or 8 year old girl, right? She could say freedom. A 1 to 3 year old yelling at her mom for freedom, it just sounds unbelievable, let's say. It sounds like some sort of hokey political story that a not good ghostwriter came up with, or perhaps Kamala came up with and fed it to the ghostwriter and said, "Hey, put that in there. Try to make me sound like this story about this little girl." We see this. Joe Biden was a notorious plagiarizer, right? He resigned or whatever, withdrew from his first presidential campaign because he kept quoting Robert Kennedy and some Scottish or English politician over there about his dad being a minor. It is absolutely just inherent in dishonest politicians to see something, to go, "Hey, did that poll well? Let's put it in my bio." And of course, when these things end up being brought out into the light, it's always, well, I misspoke, or I didn't give it the proper context, or my words are being taken out of context. They just can't say that they lied or they took it from somebody. They always try to dodge it, like, no, it's really not what you think. And thankfully, if you're Kamala Harris, you have the mainstream media trying to help you out along the way and saying, no, it's just no big deal. And for the record, I guess, there's times where plagiarism isn't the biggest deal, right? I suppose you could still be a good president or you could be a good, whatever, dean of Harvard, even though you're a plagiarist. What it is, though, is it's indicative of dishonesty. Now, you could argue that because it's a ghostwriter, you don't have to take credit for those lies. You're like, I didn't do that. I paid someone else to write it. But at some point, the buck should stop at you, like you're putting your name on it. That won't happen, but you should. You should put your name on it. You should own it. You say, okay, yes, I paid someone else. I was fine with them lying if they didn't get caught. I got caught. That's how it goes. Of course, they won't admit to that, and they don't have to, because like I said, the mainstream media is going to help hold Kamala's hand along during this, and they already have, in fact. I read one earlier, I think it was AP, don't quote me on that. It's not cited by me, but one of the places I read, they were like, well, this was negligent, but it wasn't malice, and they repeated that 3 times. We had an expert on, and he says, this looks like it was negligent, not malice. First off, negligence isn't the greatest thing for the ruler of the free world. Secondly, no one's saying it's malice. They're not saying she wanted to do evil, right? That's not the claim. That's not what you're charging someone with plagiarism. You'd be charging them with dishonesty, right? They're not being evil. They're being liars. So, besides that, there's also articles noting that Christopher Rufo and these people that have been finding these elites and these high-ranking people of plagiarism, that there's been an awful lot of black and minority people and women that have been caught with the plagiarizing. So, of course, regardless of the plagiarizations being true or not, at its core, it's systemic racism or the patriarchy or white supremacism. There's a hint of it. It's a dog whistle, right? They're dog whistling when they bring plagiarization to light. Now, let's just read a couple of these articles. Not the article itself. Let's read a couple of these titles. The Daily Beast. Conservative activist claims Harris plagiarized smart on crime book passages. All right? And it's okay to say claims. You want to get your facts straight. All right? New York Times. Conservative activist seizes on passages from Harris book. So the story right there is not Harris caught plagiarizing. It's that who did it? Not even like, hey, someone. It's like a conservative activist. Beware. Before you get into this article, know he's on the other team. Conservative activist. And it's not that he recognizes. It's not that he reveals. It's not that he discerns. It's not that he sheds light on passages from Harris's book. It's he seizes on them, right? He's aggressive. There's a little bit of violence towards this poor lady. Seizes on it. And then J.D. Vance mocks Kamala Harris over plagiarism accusation. And whatever he does, but that they're burying the lead on these things, right? The lead should be Kamala Harris's book has over a dozen serious plagiarisms in it. And instead it's, hey, these guys, the way they're coming at her is just uncouth, right? Here's the CNN one, right? Conservative activist accuses Harris of plagiarizing passages. And in it, at the bottom, it says, right-wing operatives are getting desperate as they see the bipartisan coalition of support Vice President Harris is building to win this election. Right? This is a book that's been out for 15 years. Oh, I skipped a little part. To win this election, as Trump retreats to a conservative echo chamber, refusing to face questions about his lies. This is a book that's been out for 15 years. Vice President clearly cited sources and statistics and footnotes and endnotes throughout. Well, yes, okay, good, she did, but not all of them. If you only had to cite a couple of them, like that's not how citations work. You have to cite everything that you use from other people, right? And then that's the whole thing. Why would they even bring this up? The only reason they bring it up that she's plagiarizing is because they're desperate. Well, look, they're opportunistic. Sure, they're going to find anything she can, and vice versa, right? But every article, and I guess, Newsweek or Fox, it sounds more like, hey, Kamala Harris is plagiarizing because that's not their team. But it's just so partisan. Really dumb. I think she'll get past it, though. It is 15 years ago. I think she's unburdened by what has been, right? If we remember that little one-liner from her. And like I said, she'll be able to kind of shake her head and cackle and say, it was a ghostwriter and they took it out of context. I had no idea that he put in that stuff about that. And, it's so important to me that I come from a place of trust and to reveal these things to you. And she'll just rattle on. She'll say a bunch of nothing. And it'll just be a little misdirect. And it's just no big deal. Right? And I really don't care what's in that book. But, like I said, it's a litmus test. It shows just a level of dishonesty. Now, the only thing you can say about that is like, oh, newsflash, JD, politicians are dishonest. Or Christopher Rufo, I guess he's the one that's really covering the story. It's like, oh, wow, you found out that politicians are dishonest? You want a Pulitzer for that, right? But it's no surprise. And here's kind of the interesting thing. This book is from, what they say, 15 years ago, right? How many other books, how many other articles are from a time before AI? Teachers have tools now where when they have a paper, you submit it into your little college, and as soon as you submit it, it runs it through a plagiarism checker, right? And it's using this giant database of sources and AI. And I think maybe the most interesting part about this story is like, how many more plagiarizations, how many more plagiarizers, how many more are we going to find, right? We see all the time now from X and YouTube where we can just make these mashups of politicians flip-flopping and talking out both sides of their mouth, right? I'm for this. I'm against this. I never said that. And then it shows them and it clips to them saying that. That happens all the time. They are going to come around on that. People, politicians are going to get older. They're going to die off. Takes some of them to forever, it seems. But then other people that have been around this longer will go, yes, I can't say that. I'm sure I'm on video. I'm sure there's a recording of me saying it. I've got to have a little more tact, a little more subtlety. But the plagiarization is a whole new thing. It's like, no one's going to check my paper from college. Right? And look, you could be nitpicky on this. A small little bit of plagiarizing is, there are varying degrees of this for sure. And there are times where I think any writer is going to try to, you're going to read the stuff, you're going to take it, and you're going to get an idea from them, and you got to use your own words. But your writing is going to kind of be painted with the colors of all the readings and sources that you use, right? When I was in college writing papers, I remember just purposefully trying to figure out how to put mutatis mutandis into my writings, because I was reading a lot of Murray Rothbard. He always ends up using mutatis mutandis in his writings. I was like, that sounds cool. It's Latin, and I bet my professors don't know what that Latin phrase means. So I would try back. I want my professor to have to look it up so I feel smarter. I did that. That's not plagiarism, but I took a flavor of that, right? And then if you hear a really good phrase from an author, it's going to stick in your head, or a writer. And that stuff isn't really plagiarization. It's imitation. It's maybe inauthentic or maybe just dumb, but it's not plagiarism. And like I said, there can be little plagiarisms where maybe it's not a big deal. But look, if you're running for the head executive and you've got a dozen, most of them paragraphs long, right, of plagiarizations, yeah, I'm sorry. You got to shut up and take your medicine. Fire the ghostwriter or sue them. I don't know. Do what you want, I guess. Christy Nome, she didn't write that book. I don't know. She probably did kill that dog. But I don't know. I don't know how that happened. There was a miscommunication with the ghostwriter. I don't know why they put that in there. But she blamed it. She's like, no, the ghostwriter made a mistake. I shouldn't have done this or that. Who knows? Maybe the ghostwriters get to serve as a fall guy too. But in the end, it's going to be real interesting to see just how many more times we see people go down for plagiarizing now. How many more times we see people go down for who knows? Who knows what AI might be able to out and how good of a job it'll be at vetting politicians in the future. And all right, so that's what I've got for this topic. But before I let you go, I really have tried not too much to talk about podcasts too often on this podcast, right? It seems meta. I know I've mentioned Dave Smith before, but the speculations closing in on the elections on November 5th. This week there's buzzing rumors, right? Trump said on a podcast that he is planning on doing the Joe Rogan Experience. Then a day or two later, X is alight with rumors that Kamala's team is talking to Joe Rogan about her doing an episode. And this is fascinating. I feel like 4 years ago during COVID, people were talking about, people should be doing podcasts for the elections and that the mainstream media is dying and the format's wrong. Who wants to listen to these 2-minute answers? Question, then you get 2 minutes, then you get 30 seconds to respond, then you get 30, and it was just lame, and you get this really fake, surface level talking points from the candidates instead of actually finding out if they have any breadth of knowledge from it or if they can just remember enough, right? They reading from the paper, of their book report, or can they actually sit there and paint you a picture of their ideas and what they actually understand or comprehend? But I don't remember any podcasts, really. Like a libertarian candidate would come on. Gary Johnson's been on Joe Rogan before. Bernie Sanders went on, but the big ones didn't. Joe Biden didn't, right? He's busy hiding in his basement. Donald Trump didn't. He didn't understand it. That's not the case this time. These politicians are going. There's no October election this year. There is no October debate. Right? They're not doing the last debate. What are they doing instead? They're doing as many podcasts as rallies. Kamala was on Charlemagne the God. Kamala was on Call Her Daddy or whatever. Right? And now you look at Trump, and he was just on Bussin' with the Boys. He was on the show where he announced with Joe Rogan. I don't remember what those guys are even called. He's been on Theo Vaughn. He went on to Andrew Schultz's podcast. The name's escaping me at the moment. But they're doing a bunch of these podcasts now. And it's not like early on. This is like a late fourth quarter 2-minute drill push. And what are they going with? They're going with something new. And this is a trend that is only going to be bigger in 2024. And I should note, I have not yet gotten word from Kamala or Trump's people. They know where to find me, I'm sure. If not, they can just look up at the FBI's got to have some information on me, I'm sure. So if they want to do my podcast, I would love to have either of them on, so they can just get a hold of me through that. But 2024, who knows what podcasts and what other emerging media might do to the presidential election. But it is very interesting to see how podcasts are shaping the campaigns. Really fascinating. And there's none bigger than Joe Rogan, right? That's the granddaddy of all the podcasts. And as good of an idea as it is for them to be doing podcasts, to be reaching an audience that wants to actually hear some sort of substance, though we're not going to get it from these two. And for that reason, to my point, I do not think either one of these people should go on the Joe Rogan Experience. Call Her Daddy was home field advantage. Bussing with the boys. He gets to talk about football. He talks about Brock Purdy without ever saying his name because he didn't know it. He's like, yeah, they got a good quarterback. He wasn't a very good quarterback. Was late in the draft. Now he's a good quarterback. You don't know who's going to be a good quarterback, right? Joe Rogan won't do that. He's not going to try. I heard Crystal and Sauger on Breaking Points, and they were going, oh, he's not a journalist, but he's not dumb. He's clever and stuff, but he's not going to ask him these really poignant, grilling questions. And maybe he won't in terms of that, but he'll make them answer the questions. The interviewers on CNN and Fox and CBS and NBC and ABC and all that stuff, they ask a real in-depth question, and then they just let the politician dodge it. And they chop it up and cut it real nice, and they go straight, to the next question. And then they chop it up real nice, and they ask however it wants, and then cut to commercial break, get the vaccine, buy stock in Halliburton or whatever, and then they cut to the next scene, and it's this real tight, real thing. Joe Rogan will let them. He'll ask them a question, and if they don't answer it, he goes, yeah, but you didn't answer it. And when they try to dodge again, he's like, it's a simple question. Like I just saw the clip with him and that Adam Ruins Everything guy. He's like, it's a simple question. And he just repeats it. And Joe Rogan's not going to be uncomfortable. He's not going to be out of his element. He's a man that's not going to feel awkward because he's putting someone else in an awkward position. If you go on the Joe Rogan Experience, I think you're going to have to be ready to atone for a couple of controversial statements you made. Like, I can see him doing this to both candidates. I can see Donald Trump getting very irritated by it. I can see Kamala getting very flustered and irritated by it. And I just don't see it. I just don't see it as I want this to happen. I want to watch it very badly. But if I was on either team, I would say, nope. This is a bridge too far. This is the great white well, and we don't want it. We've gotten our other podcasts. We'll take the ones that are teed up for us nice, but Joe Rogan will not let shit slide. I would discourage either one from doing it if I was in their camp, but I'm not, and I really hope to see it. And also, Joe Rogan's podcasts typically go from 2.5 to 3 hours. There's no way other one's doing it. I imagine if they don't do it, some of it might be because Joe Rogan's saying he wants 1.5 to 2 at least. Most of them want that tight, we'll do 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, maybe an hour. That's a long podcast to them. I bet you Joe Rogan says, I want 2 hours with you. And that, I think, would terrify Kamala. Trump would do it. Trump will talk for 2 hours, but it'll expose that I think it's already exposed, but it'll just go to further show that he's not an expert on anything. So, keep that in mind. If that happens, we'll definitely be doing a podcast over those podcasts. And also coming up, I'm going to do a prediction podcast on if Trump wins and if Kamala wins and what I expect to see in the next 4 years off of either of those scenarios. So, thank you for listening. Like and subscribe. Tell your friends. Yell it out your car window with or without profanities. Right? Thanks for listening. Take care.